Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that the skill you spent years building is no longer as valuable as it used to be. Not worthless, but no longer safe. Maybe new technology can now do part of it faster. Maybe your industry has changed. Maybe employers now expect a different mix of skills. For a lot of people, that thought feels deeply unsettling because it triggers a bigger fear, not just what if work changes, but what if I can't keep up? And that fear matters for one reason. It is never only about work. It is also about money, about bills, about rent, about groceries, about the quiet pressure of trying to stay stable while the world keeps moving. That is why this conversation matters so much right now. Across the United States, Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, and many other English-speaking countries, millions of people are feeling the same tension. The cost of everyday life feels heavier. The future feels less predictable. Technology keeps changing the rules, and more people are starting to ask the same uncomfortable question. If the world changes again, will I still be valuable? Most people think the answer is more information, more videos, more podcasts, more books, more courses, more advice. But that is not the real issue, because the modern problem is not a lack of knowledge. The modern problem is something much more deceptive. It is the ability to mistake the feeling of progress for actual progress. And that is where this topic becomes much deeper than career advice. Because this is not only about learning, it is about psychology, it is about money, and it is about consumption. In the modern world, people do not only buy products, they also buy the feeling of becoming a better version of themselves. That is why someone can buy 3 books about productivity, save 20 videos about focus, subscribe to 2 learning apps, and still feel stuck 6 months later. The purchases were real, the intention was real, but the progress was mostly emotional, and that pattern matters more than people realize. Because many people are not only losing time, they are quietly spending money on the feeling of improvement. That is one of the most overlooked forms of modern consumption. Not buying things to use, not buying things to enjoy, buying things to feel hopeful, a course, a book, a premium app, a new planner, a note-taking tool, a subscription that promises transformation. Each purchase seems small, but together they can become a hidden leak, not only in your budget, but in your attention, your confidence, and your ability to trust yourself. Let's make this more real. Imagine someone named Daniel. Daniel works a normal office job. He earns around $60,000 a year. A few years ago, that felt manageable. Now his rent is higher. Groceries cost more. Utilities cost more. Small monthly expenses feel bigger than they used to. So Daniel starts worrying about the future. He hears people talking about automation AI tools and changing job markets. He tells himself he needs to improve. That sounds responsible. And it is. But then something common happens. He starts consuming learning the same way people consume entertainment. He buys a course, then another one. He saves dozens of useful videos. He buys a book called something like Reinvent Yourself. He downloads an app that promises better habits. Every purchase gives him a small emotional lift. For a moment, he feels less anxious. For a moment, he feels like he is taking control. But weeks later, his behavior has barely changed. The apps are still on his phone. The course is unfinished. The book has a bookmark sitting halfway through chapter 2, and the anxiety returns. This is what makes the cycle so powerful. The purchase did not solve the problem. It only reduced the discomfort for a moment. That is why so many smart people stay stuck, not because they are lazy, not because they are incapable, but because modern self-improvement is often sold in a form that feels like action before action actually begins. And the brain loves that. The brain loves relief. It loves the feeling that something important has started. Buying a solution can feel a lot easier than becoming the kind of person who uses it consistently. That is the hidden psychology underneath this whole issue. Many people are not building skills. They are consuming hope. and hope is emotionally powerful, especially when life feels uncertain, especially when money feels tighter, especially when the future feels unstable. When people feel less control in the outside world, they often try to buy a sense of control in the inside world. That is why uncertainty increases this kind of behavior. The less predictable life feels, the more attractive improvement products become. And again, this is not irrational. It is human. When people feel pressure, they look for reassurance. The problem is that reassurance and progress are not the same thing. That difference may be one of the most important financial lessons most people never hear. Because personal finance is not only about budgets, debt, or investing. It is also about how emotions drive consumption. And few emotional spending patterns are more socially acceptable than spending money on self-improvement. If someone impulse buys expensive clothes, people may call it wasteful. If someone impulse buys 5 courses, people may call it ambitious. But both can come from the same emotional place. Anxiety, identity pressure, the fear of falling behind, the need to feel more in control. That is why this topic belongs inside personal finance, 'cause money leaks are not always obvious. Sometimes they look productive. Sometimes they look disciplined. Sometimes they even look intelligent. Now, here is where the story gets deeper. Why do people keep doing this even when they know it is not working? Because real learning is emotionally harder than consuming learning. Real learning is slower. It is repetitive. It is awkward. It forces you to face a temporary version of yourself that is not very good yet, and a lot of people do not quit because they hate growth. They quit because they hate that feeling. The feeling of being a beginner. The feeling of not understanding quickly. The feeling of looking clumsy, slow, or behind. That part matters, because many people think their problem is discipline. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes the real problem is emotional tolerance. Can you tolerate the discomfort of not being good yet? Can you stay with confusion long enough for competence to form? Can you keep practicing after the excitement disappears? That is the real divide, not between smart and unintelligent people, not between motivated and unmotivated people, but between people who can stay with the discomfort of learning and people who keep escaping back into the comfort of consuming. This is why self-learning matters so much, but also why it is often misunderstood. Self-learning is not just the ability to find information. That part is easy now. Self-learning is the ability to convert information into changed behavior without needing constant external pressure. That is a very different skill, and it has direct financial consequences. Because in an unstable world, the people who adapt more easily often protect their income more effectively. They do not need to predict the future perfectly. They do not need to know everything in advance. They just need to trust that when circumstances change, they can learn what comes next. That confidence reduces fragility, and fragility is expensive. When people feel fragile, they panic more easily. They make rushed decisions. They cling to outdated systems for too long. They buy more reassurance. They avoid uncomfortable skill building until the pressure becomes impossible to ignore. All of that has a cost. Sometimes a money cost. Sometimes a career cost. Sometimes a confidence cost. Now, imagine a different version of Daniel. Same job, same salary, same rising expenses, same uncertainty. But this version responds differently. He still feels anxious sometimes. He still worries about the future. But instead of trying to feel productive, he chooses one small skill to practice. Not 10 things. One thing. Maybe he learns a new spreadsheet function. Maybe he improves his writing. Maybe he gets better at presenting ideas clearly. Maybe he learns one useful AI workflow that saves him time each week. He does not buy 5 solutions. He works with one. He does not chase the emotional high of starting over. He stays with the awkward middle. At first, nothing dramatic happens. That is another reason many people quit. Real change often looks unimpressive in the beginning. A few practice sessions, a few mistakes, a few small improvements, no dramatic transformation, no instant confidence, no cinematic breakthrough, just repetition. But repetition builds proof, and proof changes identity. Eventually, Daniel stops thinking I need to become better. He starts thinking I am someone who can learn. That shift is enormous, because once people trust their ability to learn, they stop needing so much emotional reassurance from purchases. They become more selective, more patient, less likely to confuse buying with building. This is where psychology, personal finance, and consumption all connect. A person who cannot regulate the emotions around uncertainty will often consume in ways that feel helpful but change very little. A person who learns to tolerate the discomfort of growth often becomes better with money too. Not because they suddenly become perfect, but because they stop using consumption as their main coping mechanism. And that applies to far more than courses and books. It applies to tools, subscriptions, gadgets, organizing systems, anything sold as a shortcut to becoming a new person. That does not mean these products are useless. Some are excellent. The real question is different. Are you buying a tool you will use? Or are you buying relief? That one question can save people a surprising amount of money. It can also save them years of false starts, because false progress is exhausting. It creates a painful gap between intention and evidence. You keep telling yourself you care. You keep buying things that prove you care, but your daily behavior keeps telling a different story. Over time, that gap damages self-trust. And once self-trust is damaged, everything becomes harder. Learning becomes harder. Consistency becomes harder. Even hope becomes harder. That is why this issue goes deeper than productivity. It is about the relationship people build with their own future. If every attempt at self-improvement becomes another unfinished purchase, people eventually stop believing themselves. That is dangerous. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet way, a slow erosion of confidence, a slow belief that maybe other people can adapt but you cannot, and that belief becomes its own trap. Because once someone starts identifying as the kind of person who never follows through, they become even more likely to consume the feeling of change instead of practicing change. So, what is the actual solution? Not more guilt, not extreme discipline, not pretending the modern world is not distracting. The more honest answer is this. People need a more realistic relationship with growth. A relationship where progress is allowed to look boring. A relationship where learning is expected to feel clumsy at first. A relationship where self-improvement is measured less by what you buy and more by what you repeat. That is the shift. From consuming improvement to rehearsing improvement. From buying identity to building identity. From emotional relief to practical proof. And in financial terms, that shift matters enormously. Because the world will probably continue to sell people new reasons to feel behind. New tools, new fears, new promises, new shortcuts. That will not stop. So, the real advantage is not becoming immune to anxiety. The real advantage is learning how not to let anxiety spend for you. That is a personal finance skill. That is a consumer awareness skill. And that is a psychological skill. Maybe that is why self-learning matters so much now. Not because information is rare, but because attention is expensive. Because self-trust is fragile. Because uncertainty makes people spend in subtle ways. And because in a changing world, the people who stay strongest are usually not the people who know the most. They are the people who can feel uncertainty without immediately trying to buy relief from it. They are the people who can stay with discomfort long enough to turn practice into proof. They are the people who know that real progress usually feels less exciting than fake progress. But it lasts longer, and maybe that is the most important difference of all. If you enjoy exploring the psychology behind money consumption and how people think in an uncertain world, consider subscribing. Because sometimes the most expensive mistake is not buying the wrong thing. It is buying the feeling of change instead of building it.